After all this time, I'd say that the very first signs where I felt that I might have something wrong with me, in other words, special needs, could probably be traced back to when I was about 4 years old, if not younger, finding that my brain was always processed very slowly, and how impossible it was to even bother listening, even when I'm supposed to, in comparison to my other peers at the time. Back then, I probably had severely autistic traits, and we're talking about the severe kind. But honestly, despite this though, having autism has got to be one of the most interesting things that's ever happened to me. I can't even wish that I didn't have it anymore, as not having autism wouldn't change the fact that it exists, right? It simply exists. Yeah. So because of that, it has grown to be on my top three major interests next to certain media and animals/dinosaurs. And yeah, those things everyone seems to know about. Of course, it's easy to say that autism can easily make you constantly obsess over your interests, and I was certainly no exception. I specifically remember when I was in nursery trying to play with my plastic animals on my own, so I am well away from others, well away from socialization for some reason. Yeah, I hated playing with others, I guess. But however, when it came to the actual school years, being highly interested in animals was like a huge disadvantage to me, because the only time at school I was ever forced to do homework related to animals was once, just once, when we were learning about India and we had to study Indian animals. So yeah, you could probably imagine my extreme excitement back then. Of course, besides that, I never got to do any of that kind of passionate work again until I became old enough to go to college, where I did my animal care course. I guess in school years, animals, as in, actual living things, I'm fine, don't worry, seem to be exactly as relevant as video games. Why? Well, I have a theory on that. Well, apparently schools are willing to pretty much ban anything fun. A relatively recent example that you might know of was the time they banned fidget spinners due to becoming a distraction in lessons. So yeah, kids like anything that comes in many different colours, shapes and sizes. Anyway, that's a natural fact, so animals also fall into this category, since everything's more new to children than they are to adults, so who are already used to them. Zoos, aquariums, farms, whatever, if you go to those places, they are always packed with endless numbers of school trips and families. If they regularly taught children at school about animals in class, or even bring one in, for example, a therapy dog, there'd be a lot of drama. Everyone shoving, barging in each other's ways just to see that special guest, trying to touch or maybe stroke them if they're lucky. So, to prevent these kinds of conflicts, schools sadly had to be boring without subjects where they're actually passionate about. But when it's boring, children are less motivated to put an effort into their work and learning. And even then, people do learn differently. In this day and age, grown-ups in general should know that they are partially determining people's futures, right? Because it certainly had an effect on me, and looking back, not a healthy one at that. Possibly being the only autistic one in my primary school, life was hard enough thinking that I was literally, and I really do mean that literally in capital letters, at the bottom of the class all these years, because listening to the teacher was completely impossible. I was just too scared of not knowing the answer, because what on earth was the point of just simply replying with the normal, I don't know, when it was insanely obvious that the teacher would scout me for not listening. So by genetic nature, I couldn't help it. As much as I wished I was as capable as everyone else, I just simply wasn't. basically I was born with a target stuck on my back. If only they taught things that were actually interesting, because if they did, I certainly would have paid the most attention out of the class, and that would really helped me for the future. But no, of course that couldn't happen. And it turns out that the real world was even more mean-spirited than it felt at primary school. I mean, we all hated school for at least one reason, but at the very least I did somehow make friends there, despite first thinking that at the start of school you had to wait for people to go up to you before playing with them. So I guess I started out as the lonely one, I mean, thinking that it all comes down to popularity, but eventually I guess times had changed, so I ended up having friends. But for God's sake, things just had to change again, and it can all be traced back to that time, that big jump everyone had to take at one point in their lives. Everyone has to take this. Yeah, it all starts from sugar-coated primary school to secondary school, or big school as some of you might have called it. Sorry, I'm reading for a script, so I might stutter at times. Yeah, I understand. You see, most people at my primary school usually move to the exact same secondary school afterwards. But the unfortunate thing for me and my autism was, well, I threw a tantrum on the taster day there when we had to watch High School Musical of all films, and the staff said I wasn't, in quotation marks, capable. I wasn't capable enough of getting used to life over there, or something along those lines. So unfortunately I had to spend my secondary school years somewhere else, away from my friends. Granted that I also made friends at that new school, I was still aggravated about being separate from the friends I already made beforehand back in primary school. Even though I was told that I could still keep in touch with them, I was still so absolutely ashamed of myself that I just didn't want to. I never blamed any of them for this, but I mean, I literally thought that everyone in the world was gifted except for me, let alone felt that way. I didn't feel that way. I literally thought that that was the case. See what I mean? However, the moment I stepped into my new school, I was proven completely 100% wrong. I mean, in terms of that logic I came up with. I discovered there that there were actually people my age, and even a few years older than me, who were quote-unquote worse than me. You know what I mean. For starters, not to be mean, but some students it came across as a surprise for me anyway, not to be mean, that some students talk to staff members and even the teachers super informally in such a way that no one would ever dare to do in my old school, because they get shouted at in my old school, probably, or at least they have to assume. And to at least some extent, at this new school, staff seem to accept this kind of behaviour, unlike my last school. And however, now you see, this was unexpected and new to me, so I ended up feeling much more relaxed. That's good, right? Secondly, they even had golden time, something my last year's teacher at the time said we were, in quote-unquote, too big for. Thirdly, there's little to no homework at all, due to the fact that the people there usually struggle more often, so working at school was ironically much easier than what they had to offer in late primary school. You probably already figured it out, but this was a special school I ended up in. Now, to go even further than that, so you were even allowed to bring your own toys and DS games. Wow! That was not expected, but I was generally much happier and more relaxed there than I was in my last school. I remember how the teaching assistants would often write to my parents about how often I interacted with those peers in the lessons, and that was also the case in break times, although for some people interacting with them felt like the equivalent of getting a baby or animal to talk in fluent words. So yeah, and it was hard, if not impossible. How did you get an elephant to talk? Or wall? Anyway, I would certainly also banter a lot for fun, severely hoping that it doesn't count as bullying, because, yeah, who tolerates bullying? No one. Even in the years where, even in the lessons, I mean, they were all too easy to learn from. Despite this, though, my anger levels, if there's one thing, my anger levels certainly cooled down after every year, and by year 8, which probably had the most playground drama, at that point I started to feel a little fed up of easy lessons, sorry, I'm reading from a script, easy lessons. I was tired of my lessons being so easy, so I think I probably complained to my tutor at the time about it, and he suggested that I have a taster at the more advanced school they have nearby for a few days, but the result was I absolutely hated it. Yeah. I mean, how the heck do you succeed in an English lesson about one of Shakespeare's plays in a classroom full of pupils who would virtually every minute interrupt the poor tiny teacher in the front? I probably swore, didn't I? I'm just kidding. But it's true, like, the poor tiny teacher in the front must have a stressful job, everyone constantly interrupting. And I can't even remember if I got to try their homework, since after all, they were just taster lessons for me. But anyway, at the end, I ended up not switching schools at the end because it was actually too much. When I found out that my year 8 maths teacher, who at the time I used to hate because of that one instance I had when he shouted at me, was going to be my year 9 tutor, I was incredibly upset, although I will say for sure, if there's one thing, that whoever decides which student has which tutor for the year wasn't just picking random names out of a hat, because whoever decides the tutors knew exactly how to deal with me. At that point, I was starting to hope I could cancel this decision by moving to another school for year 9 instead of, facing my fears, but unfortunately the decision was final, and that was when my brain just snapped. Not snapped as in I was crying or threw an anger party or an outburst or anything, but the snap that gave me a new change in attitude. Basically, I was like, well then, if he, of all people, is going to be my next tutor, period, it's time to put the extra effort on being on my very best behaviour. And that way I can permanently stay out of hot water with him, since I know not to get on his bad side, that's for sure. So, to anticipate this mindset, I thought that I will be extra scheduled, and I could even count down all the weeks of the school year, every term from beginning to end. Whoever counts that. Yeah, so long story short, that was exactly what I did. Couldn't guarantee full perfect behaviour all day long, though, because back then I had friends. But the lessons were no problem, like at all, absolutely zero problem. Overall, my bantering was mostly present on the playground and on the bus, because I was addicted to it, and wanted to keep my image. Then I got autistically obsessed with first impressions on new students, so they don't badly influence me in the first place. But going to a new school would be like the most perfect opportunity to go down that road. New impressions, like new people, no one you already know to hold you back. Meanwhile, even though I was doing really well in art class, somehow my predicted grade was an F for fail, or swearing, which really confused me. But my parents had a meeting with at least one of the teachers, and it turns out the reason for this prediction was because I was working hard, but I was not being pushed enough at that school, because it didn't focus on the full curriculum, whatever that means. Basically, it was too easy for me, like I said earlier, that school. So everyone agreed that I was much more capable of everything that school had to offer. So I spent the rest of my secondary school life in this new school. As a bonus, that school had no familiar faces there. No one I already knew, no one who already knew me. So I knew for sure that there was no one there to know that I was silly before and hold me back. So I was ready for such a bliss opportunity. I remember once back in year 7 when I was at an after-school club, how my mum was invited by my tutor at the time, just so he can inform her how concerned he was about how badly influenced I was by other students, and I got punished at home for that, and yeah, I hated being punished, obviously. But this time I knew for sure that in my new school, that an incident like that was never going to happen. As I'm never going to do anything that will make a teacher sort of my arch nemesis. So I was living in this unusual, so I would probably be living in this, and did live in this unusual alternative dimension when all staff can fully respect me, not to sound like a villain, but that was my mindset at the time, to basically be perfect. Of course, no one can. So anyway, like in primary school, I would, at that time, in my new school, I would never dare to banter in this new school, otherwise I knew that would certainly attract attention. So while my last school mainly focused on autistic people, my new school mainly focused on dyslexic people, which I was not. So it's back to age-appropriate work and homework every week. Homework! As soon as I got it, I would always finish it as soon as possible with no complaining the second I returned home. So, yeah, and year 10, which is that first year I moved to that new school, was it was that much of a deep, deep push for me. And I really do mean deep, let me tell you. And yeah, let me tell you, I was just as bad at that school as I was in my last school, the school before that, except in the opposite way. First of all, I learnt that there was such thing as taking school too seriously, and that it was just as bad as not caring for your work at all. Secondly, I know I found that hard to believe anyway. Secondly, I also got paranoid that interacting with my new peers at break time would to start new friendships would get me invited to parties and all that, which could invade my already busy home schedule. Plus, remember, I had homework to do, so I used that excuse. Later on in the year, I got my home schedule completed, and the plan was to only stay self-contained temporarily. But what I didn't expect was for it to become a habit. Uh-oh. Just like back when my bantering at the school before then became a habit. Because of that, I need to get out of that school as well already. So as soon as possible. So after my GCSEs, when I had the option either to stay at school for sixth form or go to college to do my animal care course, which luckily I had the grades for, I very obviously picked the latter option to give myself a second chance to interact more and make friends, since they wouldn't, new people that I've never seen before, since they wouldn't know that I was the quiet one during my last 2 secondary school years. And of course I would have chosen that option anyway for the sake of studying animals, since I've always been, so obsessed with animals, especially wild animals and French bulldogs. Yeah. And get this, my final GCSE art grade was actually a B, and therefore much better than my previously predicted grade. However, most of my grades were either D's or E's, and I have no idea if that was either a result of not revising enough on the subjects of the GCSEs. I mean, how was I supposed to know how much revision to do, especially at the time, or the facts that I've only been academically challenged for the last 2 secondary years, which is still not enough practice, the 2 years when I was self-contained. But either way, the UK government said that I had to retake my maths and English, both being D grades, by the way. You needed a C to pass while I was in the middle of doing my animal care course, until I got at least a C grade, because, like I said, it counts as a pass. Out of those 2 subjects, I most definitely wanted to pass English, hands down, like very badly, because in my first GCSE of it, I was only 3 marks behind of getting a C grade. What? I didn't even pass my own language? Seriously? I could just swear at that, but this is for autism awareness, so I'll shut up. Seriously, curse those 3 marks, because if it weren't for them, I wouldn't have had to go through all that extra work and terrible English lessons, plus the extra tuition at home ate up potential time that could have been spent doing the main course assignments. Because of this overload, I didn't bother making any friends at that college, continuing that unhealthy route for the 3rd year, because despite saying that not making friends with anyone would be unhealthy easily, despite that, making friends would make my schedule even more complicated, and I hated my complicated schedule enough in terms of how complicated it was. So yeah, if only I actually communicated more in those last 2 years, because my theory is I would have gotten at least a few more marks in the first place if I talked more in my English lessons. After all, communication plays a large role when it comes to English. But thank dear God I passed English the 2nd time and got my animal care merit, but I couldn't level up to level 3, what with the assignment research and reference standards peaking God's level, and the unhealthy stress to go along with that. So I moved on to Project Search instead, where you hopefully get some kind of job by the end of the year. The good news was I was able to communicate enough, but unfortunately there were no more than 7 of us at the beginning of the year. So what sucks about where I live is that there aren't as many animal or plant-based jobs on offer near home, because I wouldn't mind working with plants actually, that's a good alternative. But anyway, in my opinion, as much as I enjoyed my first 2 rotations, they had no paid jobs on offer for any of them. But on the 3rd rotation it involved a lot of cleaning, but next to the public, which, as it was the city's most popular attraction. You might have been there before. As a result, I got sensory overload without informing anyone this, because I was too paranoid that saying that I really, and I mean really, didn't like working there anymore would count as a bad attitude, even though it was just work experience anyway, so I was allowed to skip the final term, luckily, and only return for the end of year celebration. In the end, I was just too pants about the idea of searching up jobs on a regular basis, when chances of me getting one that I liked were extremely slim. And after learning more about the real world and the worlds of work that year, honestly, I just felt really sorry for my mum. Like, really bad. Really? How did her giving birth to 2 children and having to look after both of them make her life any less stressful? It's just stupid, really. Of course, that's easy to agree on, and it goes for everyone, but still, all families, but still. That summer I was like, somebody please adopt me, please, and save Mum from potential suicide. But Mum refused and was all like, listen, I'm not depressed, Jack, and besides, you're too old to be adopted, and again, I'm fine, don't worry about me, seriously. Move on to your own thing. Then one day, my parents were out. When they were out, they found out about this residential that changed my life for the better, as luckily, and as the council agreed to pay for me to go there, which brings us to where we are now. And I found where I discovered some very logical reasons to regret all those years of not making friends, in case you misheard, all those years of self-containment. I realised in the end, if I were to ever continue this habit again, very awkward, nightmarish things could happen. For example, what if one day I meet up with someone who makes it their mission to destroy my self-containment, for me by forcing a weekly befriend on me. And if that befriender is a girl, not to be sexist, and I'm being forced to go out with her, people are going to take it out of context, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I might be over-worrying about this kind of stuff. That hasn't officially happened to me yet, but in case it does in the future, I'll keep off that road. And the way to do that is by talking more. Obviously and naturally. I mean, communication is just what people do in the real world, right? And I think I figured out my autism at the end. It's time to stop isolating myself from the real world, because it's come to my attention anyway that there are more than plenty of people out there that can come in handy. It was just the social imagination thing I was lacking all this time. If I don't meet up with the right people and the right supports, then life is going to remain as mind-numbing and repetitive as school's always been. So make up for it, my dear friend, and we'll make friends, okay? And that's my autism story. Goodbye!